All right, let's finish this up. And as it says, now that you know the basics of jQuery, this chapter presents the methods for effects and animations, rather. And again, it's not complete. They'd have to list every one and give an example of everything, and this book would go from being as big as it is, which is big, to being well over 1,000 pages if they did stuff like that. So again, how to use effects, a slideshow with application with effects. Just so you know, there's many ways of doing slideshows. You can do slideshows using just CSS. You can do slideshows with Bootstrap. You already know that. You can do slideshows with just vanilla JavaScript. You can do slideshows with jQuery, etc. So they're showing you a way of doing it. And then as it says, it'll show you an animation. All right, then finally they've got the carousel. All right. So as it says, the chapter starts by presenting the basic methods for effects that are provided by jQuery. All right. It says, in practice, any illusion of movement on a web page can be referred to as animation. So you can think of all the examples in this chapter as animations. Now, again, I just showed you on the jQueryui.com page where you can go and look at a lot of this stuff. All right. And hopefully you understand when you take a quick look here. As an example, let's just look at these last ones. Slide down and slide up. A slide toggle, it will do a slide up or a slide down depending on the situation. A fade in or a fade out. Typically you will use fade toggle. The reason they provided these is because quite often with the stuff that you want to do in here, it literally is a Boolean flag, or however you want to, you want to talk about it. Now, and again, we've looked at this a little bit, but it says method name duration callback. The key thing to realize in here about a callback is callback means whatever you're trying to do, when it finishes, it calls back. So it will wait on doing that. The best example I can give you for this, and I realize you guys haven't talked databases at all, but just imagine that it was something like this. All right, so let's just say that I'm an operator at a company. All right, and you call into the company and you say, "Hi, is Michael McLean there?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll go ring his office." All right, well, once I ring his office, typically what's going to happen is I'm going to lose my communication mechanism with you, right? And either Michael is going to answer or I'll get his voicemail. Well, imagine that I couldn't do anything until he literally answered the phone. All right? And I knew he was in his office. Well, then go get him. Go find him, etc. And I couldn't work with anybody else. Well, that'd be kind of stupid. And that's the way that a lot of computer stuff works. You know that some of the operations that you do are going to take some time. So rather, what JavaScript basically allows you to do is, rather than doing things synchronously, do this when it's done, then do this, when it's done, then do this, it allows you to do things asynchronously. Which means when you've got something that's going to take some time, you put it on the back burner, so to speak, and you go on and do the next thing. Callbacks are basically the mechanism that allow you to do that. Now, it used to be in the, quote, olden days, unquote, all right, that you just used callbacks. That's the way you did everything. But a callback it was kind of like every time you would add an if statement, you'd have to put an else in there. You see what I'm saying? And you ended up getting what was called callback hell, because you had so many callbacks. You had this nested in this, nested in this, nested, and it got to be a pain in the butt, and it was very hard for people to figure out what was what, and it could have really slowed it down. So then they went and they created something that were called promises. All right? And again, we may have talked about this even a little bit already, but promises are in one of three states. Either it's pending, meaning it's in wait. It's been resolved, which means, yeah, it happened. All right? Or it's rejected. All right? Now, I don't think it's going to happen, but let's suppose that I go to this wedding on Friday and it turns out that the groom never shows. I mean, right now I'm going to that wedding with the idea that the promise is pending. And that at 2 o'clock, I think it is, on Friday, that they'll start up the ceremony in the church, and by 3 o'clock, and I'm Catholic, So I know it'll be a good hour because Catholics love to make things long, all right? And so by 3 o'clock, then it should be finished. So it'll be resolved. But if for some reason they couldn't find the groom, or he didn't show, or whatever, then that's known as being rejected. Now that was easier to write than pure callbacks, but it still could be a little problematic and to figure out how it was going. All right? So then they came up with a syntax that was called Async Await. And what you do is you put the word async at the beginning of the routine, and anything that you want to potentially have to wait a while, you put the word await in front of it. So what I'm telling you is I'm giving you the natural way that this has evolved, from callbacks to promises to async await. Now that said, there are millions of lines of code out there that still use straight callbacks. There are millions of lines of code out there that still use promises. But by and large, the new type of code that people are running use async await. And that's what a lot of the class in the AWD 1111 class that you'll take in fall, that's what a lot of it is. All right. Here's some examples of chaining. We already talked about that before. All right. So it says Jquery with a callback function that gets the same result as chaining. What the heck does that mean? Well, this says wait 5 seconds and then do this. This says wait 5 seconds and then do this. It's the same thing. It's just another way of writing it. All right? And you'll notice that when you work on this, you can give it a number. And the number that you give it also can be a decimal number if you want that to be so. You typically wouldn't. But notice that by default, there's also a slow and a fast, all right, that you can put in there. And how do you learn this? You sit there and you play with the stuff. You know what I mean? Sometimes slow is too slow, fast is too fast, so you put your own number in there. And again, as it says, the callback parameter is for a function that's called after whatever you just told it to do finishes. All right. So they rewrite the FAQ application again, and this time what they've done is they've added some animation effects on there. So things fade out, fade in, etc. All right? And again, in something like that, that's not a bad idea. You know, I've seen that before where people, you know, you get onto a website and something will fade onto the screen or fade, you know, into this, whatever you want to say. The problem with that is a lot of times when people bring it up, it happens so fast if you're not watching, oh, that was really cool, oh, I didn't see it, type of an idea. All right? So then they go back and they do the slideshow. Again, very similarly to what they just did here. Now notice what they're doing here. Notice in here, the H2 tag has got a thing called caption, the image has got a thing called slide, and the div has got a thing called slides. Why? Because you want to be able to iterate your way through this. And again, this is a pretty simple example right here with a very simple slideshow. All right? And when you take a look through here, it says 2 ways to code the Jquery. Well, I've already mentioned this to you, that there's more than one way. So here's a way, and then down at the bottom, here's a way. Now, the thing is, there's not much difference in the amount, the number of lines of code. So what is the difference? It's all understandability. You look at the code and you see which one makes sense to you. So if the day ever comes that, you know, you are a professional web developer, and let's say that you're working for a small startup and you're the only person working there, you need things like W3 schools. So they can just show you an example. And then what do? Well, you make a web page and you start playing with it. All right? And what you're doing right there is you're prototyping, right? And then you show that the person or the company that you're working for, okay, is this the kind of thing you're looking for? All right? And can you use Jquery? Yeah, of course you can. Just remember that every single thing that you add, so if you add another library to do this and another library to do this, that's just one more thing you have to do as far as maintenance goes. All right? How to start and stop a slideshow? Well, you already know this kind of thing. But again, with not using JavaScript so much, but for instance with Bootstrap, you could stop those things by just clicking on the appropriate arrow or the little notch that's on the bottom. But you can also, when you set these, you can give them a time. And I've mentioned this to you before, that especially as people get older, all right, and I'm in that range, but as people get older, you typically are going to work with fade-ins, fade-outs, etc. And you're going to notice in here it's 1,000. That's a second. And I've said this kind of thing to you before. If I go out to AARP.com, the American Association of Retired People, and they've got some kind of a slideshow, I can virtually guarantee you it's not going to change every 1 second. It's just not the way it's going to be. All right, so it says here, with this code, the user can stop a slideshow by clicking on a slide and then restart it by clicking on it again. So the code does not have to be repeated. It's coded as an arrow function and stored in a constant. So it's available on an as-needed basis. All right, then they kind of end the chapter by going into some animations. And notice it says how to use the basic syntax of the animate method. And this isn't hard, but it's a pain because there's a lot of stuff that you have to do. All right? After you've done it once or twice, it's not what I call terrible. All right? I mean, you look in here, there can be a lot of stuff that you have to set. And guess what? You know what this stuff is. So what are they saying in here? They're saying take that that H1 and make its font size 2 3/4 times its normal size, give it full capacity, and that's probably, I'm not sure, but probably no left margin. All right? And here, they do it without a callback function. Here, they do it with a callback function. And what I'm telling you is like it and don't like it, that's your call. This is the way most of it's being written today, but there's still a ton of the other stuff that's out there. All right? And again, I've said this to you before. This isn't funny or anything, but there's no Jquery police out there. They're going to come hunt you down and say, hey, you were supposed to use Jquery on that one with a callback, and you didn't. If it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. All right? So as it says here, when the animated method is run, the properties are changed to the properties in what's called the properties map. That's what's in here. That's the properties map right there. All right? And it says you use camel casing instead of hyphenation. So again, when you're using this, notice font size. It's not font dash size. See that? You can't because you are writing JavaScript. So it thinks that's a subtraction. Remember that the minus sign, hyphen, whatever you want to call it, is not a JavaScript valid character. All right? So you've got to change it to use camel casing like they show right there. All right. It says for some properties, you can use show and hide or toggle. All right? Toggle is really good because really what toggle does is it does the true animation type of thing. So here's their example of it. I mean, they went a little overboard, but you get the idea. All right. I've already mentioned how you can chain these and how you can put them on multiple lines. Notice you can set 2 different effects up. It'll run that one first, and then it'll run this one. All right. Now, sometimes when you're in the middle of running one, what can happen, which can be problematic, is you want to make sure that if you're in the middle of running an animation, you don't start running another animation. That actually can happen. So typically the way you code it is if you are in the middle of an animation and another animation starts, you stop the first animation. All right? And this is a little bit of the history or whatever you want to call it, chronology. When you chain the effects and animations for an element, they're placed in a queue. So in other words, it's just like a queue, like the first day of class when you all walk down to get your parking pass and whatever, you were all in a line. The first one in was the first one serviced, etc. And that's the same kind of thing in here. As it says, in some cases a problem occurs if the user starts a second animation before the callback for the first one finishes. All right? So how do you get around that? And that this is what they're explaining next. With these different methods, delay, stop, and finish. And they do pretty much what you think that they would do. You know, a delay will do a pause for you, right? A stop will stop what you're currently doing. And notice the finish. Stop the current animation and clear the queue. So if there's anything else that was supposed to happen, it's just gone now. So here's, it says, an animation that moves thumbnail images down on mouse hover. So when you highlight that one, you can see how it goes down a little bit. And there's all sorts of different kinds of effects that you can do. As it says, delay works as an alternative to using a one-time timer. All right, and stop, as it says, stops the bouncing effect that occurs if the user moves it. There's really weird stuff that can happen with this. If you're doing an animation on something and you click someplace else and you haven't accounted for it, weird things can happen. All right, and typically you don't want to have two animations running at the same time. That can be very confusing for the person who's trying to use the site. All right, easings, I've showed you that one before out on the Jquery UI. And as it says, easing refers to the way that the animation is performed. Jquery provides two easings, swing and linear. Swing is the default. As it says, it's the one you usually want. But you've got control with the easing. And what I mean is, for instance, you can have it start slow and end fast. You can have it start fast and end slow. You can have it start fast, kind of peak in the middle and slow down and then go fast again. So it's up to you as far as how you want to set this up. All right? It says to use easing, you code a script element from the plugin library, which they're going to talk about in the next chapter. All right. How to use the advanced animate syntax and the methods for working with queues. All right. So here's some of the stuff that you can use in here. I'm not going to read any of it. This can get as complex as you want it or need it to be. All right? But I've said this to you before. Just make sure that when you're doing this, don't ever let the animation take over the message of what you're trying to do. All right? And the last thing that's in here is this Carousel Application. So they give you the interface with just HTML and CSS, and good, bad, or indifferent. You know, they're doing a good job there of promoting their own products, I guess. All right. So the critical CSS, and let's just very quickly look the JavaScript and the Jquery. All right, they're showing you the new stuff. Slider.animate. Okay. And I believe that's pretty much, that's it. So tomorrow then, what we'll do is we will go over first chapter 10, and as it says, it's on forms and form validation. It's a short chapter, 16 pages. And then we will go over the next chapter, which is on plugins, a little longer, but it's still not a very long chapter. And with both of those, I'm going to show you a few things, I think I mentioned this already, that are not in the book that I think they're worth you at least taking a look at when you go through this stuff. All right, so if there are no other questions, then the rest of the period will be lab. And I will have, by the end of the period, I will have a grade out there for each one of you for the test. All right?